Hey y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this is my Seattle real estate market update for June 2025. Well, we are about halfway through 2025 here, one more month to the midway point. We'll do a little recap next month, a little midway recap. As we look at the stats from May, we're starting to see some of those predictions that I made at the beginning of the year coming true in the data and in practicality out in the market. But before we jump into the stats and some of my thoughts about what's going on in the market, I want to share a story that I think encapsulates some of these changes and shifts that are happening right now in May. So I met some clients a couple years ago at a homebuyer class that I hosted with my go-to lender, and we stayed in contact over the past couple years. The timing really just wasn't right for them for multiple reasons. And here we are this spring looking for a house. And number one, it didn't take that long, which was awesome. I think a big part of that is there's just more options right now. And we'll see as we look at some of these stats, there's just a ton of options actually in comparison to some of the previous years. I think another great benefit for them was the ability to negotiate a little bit. We were able to get the house for below the asking price, and we were also able to include some of those contingencies, inspection, financing, things that protect the buyer in a home purchase. So for them, this was a great opportunity to choose from some more options and also benefit from having a lower price and the protections any buyer would want during a home purchase. And this house a little bit farther outside the city in Snohomish, a little bit north of the city. Great area, great house, excited for this family. Now, let's talk about the rates, because the rates have been a huge driving factor in the housing market. They always are as far as supply and demand in our current state, more often the demand side of things. But we've also seen, because so many people have really low interest rates, that the mortgage rates have actually affected the supply as well. And looking at the rates right now, today on Mortgage News Daily, they say 6.87 in their survey, which is down a little bit. We were talking about almost 7% last week. We've really been hovering, and I think I say this, feels like a broken record at this point. We've been hovering in this upper sixes, low sevens for the better part of a year. Now, I think there's increasing pressure on the Fed to maybe make some changes with the rates, but there's also been the stance that that's not happening. So for now, I don't expect to see any shift here. I really do think rates are going to hover in this same realm for the rest of the year. There's hope maybe that changes next year, but so far what we've seen this year, we're seeing signs pointing towards rates remaining in this range. Now, what's going on with the market? Okay, so we're in the middle of the spring. We're kind of wrapping up the spring housing market. We've got about a couple weeks left before we transition into the summer. And I mentioned, and if you follow along on a weekly basis, if you don't, you should, but we've been seeing signs of the housing market slowing down even a little bit earlier this year, mainly due to the amount of inventory, which would be in contrast to what we saw over the past couple years with really low inventory. And we're seeing sales prices near all-time highs. Last month, we were right there. We're still in that same range, 984,500 in Seattle, which is up year over year, 2.8%. Not great, right? It's not a huge jump, hardly keeping up with inflation, right? Bellevue down 5.6% year over year at 1,925, almost 2 million. But prices are hovering, like I said, right around those highs. And so we haven't seen a big drop off in the home prices. And you can see back, and I've got a graph here showing us what 2022 looked like when we were at those all-time highs. And we're in that ballpark, if not beating it in some cases. Now, what are houses selling for? Are they selling for the asking price? Are they selling for over asking price? That's a fairly common question. The quick answer is houses are still selling in Seattle and Bellevue on average over asking price, but not quite as much as you would have seen in previous years, and especially during the height of the market. Usually the spring, April, May, June is the high point where you see the most amount over asking price. And this year we're seeing 1.8% over asking price in Seattle, 2.3% over asking price in Bellevue. Both of those are down year over year modestly, about 1% to 1.5%. Days on market are still short relatively. Median is 6 in Seattle, 5 in Bellevue. Those numbers are quite a bit bigger countywide in King County and also Snohomish County, right? But the bigger cities still selling relatively quickly. Average days on market. This is where you start to see where the weight of some of those longer time on market start pulling things up. 17 in Seattle, 15 in Bellevue. And in both cases, we're seeing a greater time on market as we're starting to shift into the summer months. Now, year over year, you can see here that the days on market are actually shorter. So we're in this kind of transition period where, yes, we have the days on market is relatively short. Homes are selling at or near record highs. We're seeing that homes are still getting over asking price in some cases, again, not all cases, but at least enough of them to pull up these different averages. But what's going to change, and we've been seeing this in the background, and this is going to be relatively quick to happen. It's already happening in Snohomish County and King County as a whole, but it's about to start happening here as well, I would say, that the new listings are way up. So in Seattle, we had the most new listings since 2019. All right, we haven't seen that many new listings since then. This is in contrast to seeing the fewest amount of new listings over the past couple years than we've seen since the housing downturn. And it's crazy. Bellevue actually had the most new listings that we've ever seen in a month, at least as far as I can look back to 2006. I would doubt we would have had more before that. But we're seeing a lot more housing inventory coming on the market. Why is that, right? We've seen these mortgage rates hovering for a few years, which we were talking about how people were feeling stuck and trapped in their houses because they have these great rates. Why would they want to sell? And that was also affecting the supply. So part of why I think we have the prices that we have right now, even with the high rates, is because not only was demand affected, but supply was affected. Well, we're starting to see a lot more houses coming on the market. What does that mean, right? What does that mean? We're going to get to that here as we continue. We're looking now at closed sales, right? Fewest closed sales in Seattle in a May since 2011 during the peak of the housing crisis. 581 closed sales. Bellevue, 87. Not quite as dramatic for Bellevue, but still really low amount of closings. Not keeping up with the increase in new listings. And just for perspective, we saw fewer closed sales in Seattle and Bellevue this May than we did over the past couple years. And we saw dramatically more homes coming on the market than we did the past couple years. Last year and the year before, those numbers were relatively in concert. So there wasn't too much change or effect to the market, even with the higher rates. We're going to start seeing that because even looking at the pending sales numbers, we're seeing a similar trend. We had the fewest number of pending sales in Seattle. Bellevue wasn't quite a record, but close, since 2011 and 12 during the housing crisis, right? This has been a theme as I'm looking at the data this week. It's interesting because, again, we're still at those prices, but what we are seeing underlying all of this is, hey, hold up. We're going to start to see things cooling off fairly quickly because the inventory numbers or supply of housing is building. And then that's evident here when we look at the homes for sale numbers. We have 57.6% more houses for sale in Seattle and 120% more houses for sale in Bellevue. So 1,485 and 251 houses respectively. That's the most inventory that we've had since May 2019. So we have inventory building really quickly. Now, we don't have the inventory numbers of the housing crash, and nor do I think we will. But what we're seeing is just inventory is building, and we're transitioning from this hyper sellers market that we've been in towards a more neutral market. We're not in a buyer's market by any means yet, but we're transitioning into a more neutral market. We've seen glimpses of that during 2019, I would say 2018, 2019, we saw little glimpses. We also saw little glimpses during 2022 into 2023. We may be headed into a more prolonged look at what a more balanced market looks like. And we're seeing just massive amounts more of homes for sale creeping up, right? Almost double, actually more than double the houses for sale back in 2023 when things were slowing down. People were just not selling and they were not buying. Now we have more people buying, which is nice, but we still have way more people trying to sell than people buying, which is why now in Seattle, we have 3 months of inventory and we have 3.2 months of inventory in Bellevue. These are, again, the highest supply numbers since 2012. So what does this mean for buyers and sellers in the Seattle, Bellevue metro areas? And my first thought is that we have prices significantly higher and interest rates higher, right? Which makes affordability a challenge. And that's a big reason that we have fewer buyers in the market. And we still have more, thankfully, than we did over the past few years, but it's not keeping up with the amount of sellers. There's way more people putting their houses on the market now, more inventory. Some thought this was going to happen a couple years ago, and that we were going to see the market crash in the Seattle area. That did not happen. What we're seeing now, though, is a more gradual building of inventory, which is somewhat sustainable. But at some point, you need to have more buyers for the inventory, or else these numbers keep building. You have less pressure on the pricing, and you start to see prices coming down. So do I see prices coming down dramatically? I do not at this point, based on what I'm seeing, but I think we need to be aware of what's underlying all of this. Sellers, I think the end of the multiple offers is coming. I think the over asking price, the end of that's coming, at least for the near future. For 2025, I think it's definitely over. Doesn't mean it's not coming back. The past few years we've seen, just like we do in any year, cycles, right? You have a hotter end of winter and spring, and then the summer cools off a little bit, and then things dip a little bit, and then you kind of have these like circles that are slowly rising in the market as those cycles happen naturally. This next year, it's going to be really interesting to see if the inventory continues to be at this rate or if it slows down a little bit. But so far this year, we've just had a ton more houses coming on the market. And some of that's probably people finally like, I'm doing it anyway. I'm selling, I'm moving, I'm buying something else. I just can't stand it anymore. And then you have the natural people moving in and out of the area and such. But I know for some people, they're getting kind of antsy. It's been a few years waiting for these interest rates to come down. Finally, the acceptance of that could be leading to more people selling as well, even if they have great interest rates. Now, for buyers, this is what you want to hear. You want to hear we have the most amount of supply in over 10 years. There's a lot of options to choose from. You want to hear the competition is slowing down, and you want to hear there's opportunities for negotiation and offers that fit you and your needs and not just what the seller wants. Thanks so much for watching this month's Seattle real estate market update. If you got some value out of this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and following along. And if you're watching this and you're thinking about making a home purchase or making a home sale in the Seattle area, I'd love to bring some value to that situation as well.